everybody. I'm assuming at least there's a couple of people here. I know that this was fairly short notice. I've been kind of wrapped up with the holidays, but I wanted to just go ahead and hop on here and talk a little bit about the FlySpeed um, SQL query program. And I know that I think David specifically had mentioned something about connecting any like external database management software to his CV database and having problems. So hopefully this will help him, if nobody else. So all right. First of all, I linked this website on the forums, and you should be able to find it. But basically, this is the website for a program called FlySpeed. And I didn't know anything about FlySpeed until fairly recently, but it is a piece of software that's recommended by Cabinet Vision for exactly what we're doing with it here today. So um, that helps me feel a little more comfortable with it, even though it's a free piece of software. And, you know, I'm always a little bit wary of that. But anyway, so I recommend the 64-bit version unless you have, for some strange reason, a reason to go with the 32-bit version. I'd recommend going with the 64-bit version. So once you download it, it's a fairly straightforward install. I'm not going to walk through that, but I will just briefly go through connecting to a database, to the Cabinet Vision database specifically. So I've already connected to my S2M in my CV report database, but for the sake of going through this and helping, I'll walk through this step by step. So the first thing you're going to do is click this new connection button, or you can click connection and select new connection. It might seem at first like this would be exactly what we want, the MS SQL server, but it is not. You want to select MS Access under Direct Database Server Connection. If you happen to know your file name, type it in. You're weird if you do, honestly. But it's going to be under, C Planet or C Cabinet Vision, and then specifically pick the version you're after, and then your database folder. And what we are wanting to go for is report. So select report.eccdb. There is no password, or at least if there is one, it's blank. I don't check show user login prompt because there's no password. So just click next, and then you can name this whatever you want. I'll name this like my CV report database. If you want this to open automatically on the application startup, go ahead and check that option. I don't. And if you want to open the properties connection, the connection properties dialog to set up advanced options, go for it, but I'm not going to for this either. I'm just going to leave open connection after closing the wizard up to open my connection. So once we've done this, we are immediately connected to the report database. And if you're familiar at all with this, these tables are going to seem familiar. Just our drawers table, our job info, notes, parts. These are a few things that regularly get asked about on the forums. So my SQL query skills are abysmal. I know enough to get where I need to, but if I were to show what I write to somebody like, I don't know, like Classic Chariot on the forums, who is obviously an SQL ace, I would be embarrassed. I shouldn't be, but I know that my query language capabilities are very, very limited. And that particular individual is spectacular. So for those of us who are not so well versed with it, this piece of software, FlySpeed, is very, very helpful. And again, not to sound like a broken record, but I didn't learn anything about this piece of software for way too long. It would have simplified life for me tremendously. Although, to be fair, fumbling my way through the little bit I did was very helpful because I picked up on a couple of things that just made using FlySpeed in general easier. And that was, I guess, to just briefly review before we get into this, that was things like how to count in the query instead of just pulling information. So, we would want to count the individual part, the individual parts part ID to report a quantity, for an example. We don't want to just report the different IDs of these parts. You would want to count them so that you could report a quantity. And if you don't know the basics of SQL query languages at all, and you have no idea that you can modify your select statement to count something rather than return rows, this, that can be very challenging for you to get past. So anyway, just a basic understanding of SQL commands was very, very helpful. I still don't know how to join tables very well. I have a fundamental understanding. So that's where this is very, very useful. So the report that I want to build today is going to demonstrate how you can use FlySpeed to create relationships between different tables. In other words, it's going to create the join for us. So I cannot speak to whether or not what I'm about to say is best practice, but it's what works for me. And so this is how I'm going to do it. But when I think about this, a lot of times when I think about building a query, I tend to think about it the same way Cabin Division has the parent-child relationship. And what I mean by that is I tend to want to start at the highest level possible and then join my other tables. And so for me, that would be like job info. That would be the highest level. So if I double click on job info, as I just did, we're going to get this query builder going on here. And you're going to get, if you've spent any time in MS Access, this is going to look familiar. But this is basically a visual representation of the table job info. And each of these is one of the records or columns, if you will. It's not a record, it's one of the columns. So again, as we expand this big list of information is all included within this smaller window. So for me, after job info, if I cared about what rooms, like my cabinets, existed within, the next thing I would care about would be rooms. So I'm going to double click on rooms, and you'll notice this appeared. And there's also a little graphic, if you will. I don't know enough about databases to use the correct verbiage here, but basically what this is saying is there's a relationship between the job info ID and the room.job ID column, if you will. Because we can have many rooms, but only one job, there is a 1 next to the job info and the infinity or infinite symbol next to the job ID. And I believe the correct term for this is a one-to-many relationship. So there's one job ID, there are many room IDs. And while we're at it, the little key next to these top columns, if you will, I really need to figure out what that word is to use for this, but they basically mean that they are unique. It is a unique key for that database. So there will never be a repeating room ID. There will never be a repeating job ID. Now you might think to yourself, why is there not a key next to job ID right here underneath rooms? That's because this is not referencing the actual job info table. So you might have 6 different rooms and all of those rooms could have rooms.job ID as a record. And all of those job ID integers would return the same number. So that's why it's not kind of showing the key next to job ID underneath the rooms table. this will not be a unique key under the rooms table. So hopefully that didn't confuse you guys. Maybe it did, but anyway. So from here, what I would care next about in my rooms would be my cabinets or my assemblies. So there's no assemblies table here, but there is a cabinets table. So if I double click on the cabinets, I now have my cabinets table displaying, and you'll notice again, we've got another automatic one-to-many relationship being created between these tables. What this is doing basically is FlySpeed is saying, aha, I see, you are interested in the information that exists within these two tables, and I know for sure there's a relationship between them. So FlySpeed is automatically building that relationship. And if you look down here, you'll notice that it's already doing the from statement by joining each of these tables together. So at this point, because I'm selecting everything or an asterisk, in other words, because I have not checked any of these individual boxes, if I were to run the query right now, I would just get every single one of these columns, if you will, for every one of these tables. It would be extraordinarily useless, but just to sort of demonstrate what FlySpeed is already doing for us, if you click execute up here, it's going to run the query. And what do you know, we actually got 2 rows on this. But if you scroll over, it's just this massive list of useless information. These tables are joined successfully, but this doesn't really get us anything we want. So if we go back to the query builder, let's just say that we didn't want all of those pieces of information. All we wanted to know is what's the job name and what is the room name or the list of rooms that do exist within the job. And I also want to know what cabinet IDs there are. So now I am specifically selecting the types of records that I want to see. You'll notice down here in this sort of text preview area, it's changed now. So now I'm selecting jobinfo.jobname, rooms.roomname, and cabinets.cabinetid from these joined tables. This is probably starting to look a little more like what you might be familiar with if you spent any time in the report properties area of Cabinet Vision building a query. So at this point, if we execute the query, we have a way smaller table showing up here, right? The job name is default, which I do have a job open. There are 2 rooms. I have 2 rooms. And there are 2 individual cabinet IDs. I have 1 cabinet in room 2. Oops. And I have 1 cabinet in room 1. So it's working basically. So if we want to go back to the query builder, because we probably want to know more information about whatever it is we're gathering than just the job name and the list of rooms and the cabinets in each room. Although frankly, this is not a bad delivery ticket. For starters, you know, a lot of times when you're trying to deliver cabinets places, what do you really need to know? You need to know which job it is and which cabinets go in which rooms. So really and truly, it's useless, but it could grow into something fairly helpful. So let's take this a step further and say, not only do I want this table to tell me all of the cabinets and what rooms they, what rooms they exist within, I also want to know the parts for each cabinet. So if I double click on parts, there's no relationship that gets built automatically, which can be challenging. And this is where understanding a little bit about SQL queries in general is going to help you out a lot. So basically what we're running into right here is FlySpeed, for whatever reason, is not automatically joining these tables. I don't know why that is, to be completely honest, but I do know for sure that I can create a relationship. I can join these tables together because I know that there is a cabinet ID for the cabinets and there is a cabinet ID for the parts. So how would I build this table relationship to get the parts to come through? The way you go about doing it is you select, and it doesn't seem to matter which table you pick first from, but select the, I don't know, the identifying column, if you will, that you would like to join for these tables. You right click on one of them and you select Start Link by Cabinet ID. If I had something else like with string, it would say Start Link by with string, but I know that I'm trying to link my cabinets.cabinet ID with my parts.cabinet ID. So right click, Start Link by Cabinet ID. So we've started this link, we've not finished it yet. FlySpeed doesn't really know what to do, so it hasn't done anything. So now we come over to the parts table. We right click on cabinet ID and we select create link from cabinets.cabinet ID to cabinet ID. So now we've forced this joining of these tables. And to the best of my knowledge, the reason this did not automatically create a relationship is because it was not obviously a one-to-many or a one-to-one. So at this point, we have now joined our cabinets and our parts table. We still have not selected what we want to see from the parts table, though. I don't really want to see the cabinet ID again. That's fairly useless, but maybe I want to know like what the name of the part is. So I think that there is a description in here. So now I can get the parts description. And if I want to know how many parts there are, for example, like I remarked on earlier, part ID, because we know that the part ID should be fairly unique. It's not completely unique, but well, I think it's unique enough for what we're trying to do here. So at this point, if I execute my query, this is not super useful, right? I'm getting individual part IDs. And so to go back on what I said earlier, these are not individual numbers, I'm sorry. These are specific part IDs that get associated with certain parts. So you'll notice exterior banding is 58 over and over. Anywhere you see it, it's 58. However, we do have a complete list of all parts. We know which cabinets they belong to, and we know which rooms they belong to. So if we wanted to count how many pieces of interior banding we've got, or exterior banding, or, you know, whatever, how many Rafix connectors we've got, this is where having a little bit of knowledge of SQL will help. So you can come right into this little window where FlySpeed is already automatically building your query, and you can modify it. So I don't want to actually see my Parts.Part ID number listed. I am much more interested in counting them up and seeing how many of them exist within a single assembly. How many adjustable shelves do I have? How many partitions do I have? Again, so you can do that by modifying this to say count. So we've got count Parts.Part ID in parentheses. And it is usually a good practice in my mind, in my opinion rather, to change the way this displays. So we'll write after this little section that we've got, we'll put as part quantity. So now instead of listing part ID, it's going to actually display part QTY. So I'll execute the query again. And there's a problem. I'm honestly not sure why, to be completely honest. Just a moment. Oh, I think I understand what's going on here. So I'm fairly certain that I need to group, and I was not grouping. So we'll group all of this together, and now we'll execute the query. I want to get this reorganized. So we're back to what we had before, but this is definitely not working out the way I had expected. So I'm going to go back to the query builder. I've done something wrong. I'm not entirely certain what it is wrong that I've done here. That's right. I'm going to go with the NCID to count, I think. No. We'll just kind of take just a small step back to the step that I had done just before this. So again, we've got all of our parts listed. Hmm. Well, I feel like a fool because this was working perfectly fine for me previously. And there we go. So, okay, when I counted, I needed to group, and I did not group before. That was the step that I missed when kind of trying to go through this. So, apologies if that was confusing for you guys. So the steps for this would be, again, select all the values that you're looking for. First, you would want to group. Then, with FlySpeed, you could add the Parts.Part ID and count it, but you do not want to group the counted, um, the counted record, if you will, or column. So anyway, without having a whole lot of SQL knowledge at this point, I've gotten to a point to where we've got a report that's listing the individual quantities of the individual parts for each cabinet. It's grouping it by cabinet ID and by room. So what can we actually do with this at this point? How do we get this from FlySpeed into Cabinet Vision? It's actually very, very simple. From the query builder, you can choose to reformat this or not. It's up to you. But if you reformat to compact formatting, it's going to change the way the query is written, and it looks a lot more like what Cabinet Vision by default has. So you can just copy this query, and then you can jump into Cabinet Vision. So actually, if you have FlySpeed open and connected to your database the way I do right now, and you come into Cabinavision and you try to connect to your report center, you're going to get an error. This is basically letting you know that you're trying to access a database that is already open. So what you need to do is you need to just disconnect with FlySpeed, and then you can go right into your report center in Cabinavision. So I have this FlySpeed demo report that's completely blank that we will start with. So I do have a couple of tables in here, but this is just kind of my template report. We're going to make a new table. And it does not matter what we select for the table. All we're trying to actually do is create the table. So don't worry about picking anything important here. I'm just going to pick the first thing that shows up and the first value from that list. And I'm going to click OK. So I've got a new table now called accessories. And I'll just call this the FlySpeed table. Delete the SQL that came with it and paste what you have copied from FlySpeed. And then click Data Preview. And now we're getting exactly the same list that we saw in FlySpeed, except we're in Cabinavision. So now we have a table that we've generated with FlySpeed that we've brought into Cabinavision that we can now use within one of our reports. So how would you go about doing that? We're coming up on 30 minutes. I started a little bit late and we had a little bit of a hiccup, so I'm going to go a little bit longer than I normally would with this portion of this. And we'll go through building a very simple report that can do something with this information that we've gathered. So, design report. My report, again, like I said, is completely blank. So I need to get a table in here. And the table I'm interested in pulling from is the FlySpeed table since we just built it. So I have a bad habit of actually very much disliking all of the Cabinavision wizards. I had a really bad experience early in my career where I was learning to program UCSs and I used the wizard and the wizard misspelled drawer. So I had this UCS and it was for each drawer part or for each drawer assembly, but instead of DWR, it was DRW. And you would not believe how long it took me to find that stupid problem. It's like I'm scarred from it. It was such a terrible experience that by default, I don't even trust Cabinavision's wizards, and it's a total overreaction, and I understand that. But normally at this point, I just click OK. But for those of you who have not been traumatized by that, basically you would want to just pick the different information that you're interested in, which hopefully we've already picked the only types of information we care about. So again, for me, this would go job name, room name, cabinet ID, part description, part quantity. For whatever reason, that's just how my mind works, sort of like a top to bottom grandparent to grandchild relationship, if you will. When you click OK, you're going to get a table that is pretty useless, to be honest. It automatically puts a footer line in, and for this information, unless you're trying to count up total number of parts or total number of cabinets, it's fairly useless. So I'm just going to delete it. And then we've got a header line, which can kind of be useful, but if I was trying to break this up grouped by cabinets, this header line is fairly useless to me as well. So for me, rather than job name here, I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to go into this. Design your report how you want. What I'm more interested in demonstrating here is what we can actually do with the data. So again, by default, I took out my footer and I've just got a header row with static values and then a row that's going to display information about my cabinets. I don't really need the job name listed on every single table row. So that to me is more of a header line. So I'm just going to plug this into this header line, and I'm going to delete the rest of these other. So now I've just got this one header line at the top of my report that'll report the job name one time rather than every single row. So here's a little trick I've been wanting to show. When you go to resize a column by default, if you just click and drag, it's going to try to move associated columns along with it, which is very useful until you don't want it. So there are a couple of ways to get around this, but the fastest way I have found is to simply hold Control and start resizing your column. Then you can let go of Control and snap it to wherever you need. For me, a header row like this would just be the entire row. And then to make it a little more obvious that it's a header, I'll make it a little bit larger. So next to my data lines, again, I don't need to see my job name reporting for every single line. To me, that's useless information, so I'm going to get rid of it. The room name can be useful. The cabinet ID I probably want, and the description and the quantity are also values that I like. I'm going to try to hit a few different things I've seen people ask about on the forums here at the same time. So cabinet ID right now is reporting as 1.00. This is a problem for a couple of reasons. Basically, we don't need the zeros, so it's like wasted ink, it's wasted space, it's wasted everything. And when you start talking about subassemblies are, 1.1 or 1.2 or whatever. So I think that it's best if you set the cabinet ID up to report as an integer. And that could be done in a couple of different ways, but well, I'll show you the two different ways I know of to easily do this. So the first way is to set the format number and set it to 0 decimal places. That would eliminate the 1.00, but there are a couple of reasons why I don't like doing that. It complicates this if I'm trying to make this table line a little more customized. And what I mean by that is if I wanted to have this record report instead of just one, and I wanted it to report like the cabinet number and the actual number for whatever reason, first of all, I'm getting an argument error because it's expecting a string and it's giving me a value. So this is something that's easy enough to get around if you run into this. Just convert the value to a string. So once we convert the value to a string, the error goes away, but we're still seeing cabinet number 1.00, which is fine. So now cab number 1.00, if I want to change this and format it to a number that has 0 decimal places, now I just get a 0. Because when I've changed this to format as a number, it doesn't pick up any of the cab number, anything going on there, and it's just an error. So rather than going this route, I think it is a better idea to just convert the number to an integer right here by using the built-in function int. So to simplify this because having a lot of this stuff all together can get a little bit, if you're not very familiar with this, it can get overwhelming. So to take this back to the very simple cabinet ID only that we started with, if you want to convert this number to an integer value, which would never have a decimal place, you can use the function int for integer and include the entire value within parentheses that you're trying to convert to an integer, and you will get it to, you'll get an integer. There's a lot of functions, and I'm not going to go through them for a lot of reasons, but I think that's not even a numeric one. Yeah, it's a mathematical function for integer, right? This is a huge list of stuff in here, these different functions, but you should familiarize yourself with it if you're trying to produce advanced reports. It's very, very helpful. So anyway, I want this to say cab number 1, so I'm not going to choose to format and remove the decimal points here. I'm going to instead choose to force the string value of FlySpeed table.cabinet ID to be an integer. And now we see cab number 1. So same deal here with the quantity value. I can first change it to an integer, and then I can say quantity plus. But of course, at this point, it's expecting a string, and we're giving it a value. So we need to convert this to a string so that we no longer have an error. So the last thing that I think we should do here is typically you would want to group by cabinets, which would eliminate the need for having cabinet number 1 here at all. But so that I don't drag this on a whole lot longer than it needs to be, I'm going to just briefly talk about group headers. So a header line is something that will print at the beginning of a table. So like your job information in a table would only have what's the word I'm looking for? It would really only print one time because there are not enough pieces of information in the table to force it to span multiple pages. So a header line is intended to print just one time per table. A group header, on the other hand, will repeat as many different times as you have a group change occur. So what that means is if I wanted to categorize my parts somehow, I don't know, let's just say vertical versus horizontal parts, and we had a way to group them as vertical parts or horizontal parts. The group header would print twice in that situation. One time would print for the vertical parts, and it will list all of the vertical parts underneath it. And then the group header would print again for the horizontal parts, and it would list all of the horizontal parts under that. Versus the header line, which would be all parts for the job, would only print one time for that given table. So in this particular case, I only have one table. The only way I can get groups of cabinets would be to use the group header. So I'm going to create a group header, and I'm going to group by I think it's spelled this way, but I guessed and I was right. But if you don't know what to put here, just start by typing the table name, which you can see we've got table, FlySpeed table, or you can also look over here under your variables and fields and see that one of the fields that's accessible to you is the FlySpeed table. So if you start by typing FlySpeed table, you get a list of the different pieces of information that you can pull. So once you finish typing the complete path, if you will, the words will change to this maroon red color. That's basically letting you know that you have correctly referenced a value that exists within the table that you are currently utilizing. If I were to reference one of my job parts records or job materials records, it would not show up maroon this way, but I might still get a returned hit for the first row, the first record in that table. So just again, remember that the maroon font or the maroon colored text lets you know that you are calling information from the correct table that you're building this within. And because I've got this set up to group by, each time there is a different cabinet ID, from 1 to 2, for example, it's going to create another group. And so I'm going to make the line itself so this is my group header line, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. So my group header line is going to display whatever cabinet number these parts belong to. So at this point, if we go and look at this report, what we should be seeing, because we've got 2 cabinets, is we should see cabinet 1 as one group, and only cabinet 1 parts are listed. And then we see cabinet 2 as a different group header, and all of the cabinet 2 parts are listed. It's just convenient, or rather, it's just happenstance that room 1 and room 2 are this, only for cabinet 1 and 2. In room 1, if I just duplicate this assembly, now when we go look at the report center, you'll see that it's not grouping by rooms. It is very much specifically grouping by cabinets, and it doesn't actually care which room it is. So as an alternative, if you cared more about grouping by rooms rather than cabinets, when we created the group header line, rather than selecting the cabinet ID to group by, you could simply select the room ID. So we got cabinet number 1, cabinet number 2, cabinet number 3. And it's listing the rooms, cabinets, obviously redundant information. So I'm going to modify this one more time to have this actually group first by room and then by cabinet. But ultimately, my stream is pretty much done. So if anybody is wanting to stick around and watch while I do this, you're more than welcome to. And if anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to ask them, and I will try my best to answer them. Otherwise, I'm just going to kind of quietly work my way through this. I mean, I will talk my way through this still, but again, the content for the stream is pretty much over. So if I want to group this first by room number, room name, I guess. That's why I was having a hard time with this. I've got to actually, I'm calling room names, not room numbers. I would first do a group header for the room name specifically, and I would need to have it grouping by FlySpeed table room names. So at this point, I no longer need my room name reporting. Make it a little bit larger so that it's obvious that it's a group header. And then something else that I like to do with these is I like to create a line underneath them. And I normally will do that with the frame. So I don't want a line on the left, top, or right, but I do want a bottom line. I want it to be black and 0.01 inches thick. So now with each group break, I will have my room name and a horizontal line that's going to kind of split this all up. So we got room name, room 1, room name, room 2, and we've got all of our cabinets listed individually. Now, this is fairly obnoxious to have this report this way, and what I mean by that is I think that we should never have a new group start halfway down a page. Well, that's not true. Sometimes we should, like on hardware reports, if our header line was the vendor and we had a table for each vendor, for example, and then we wanted to break the components down individually, then I do think it makes sense to have group headers listed halfway down the page. But for this particular type of report, I think that a new page or a page break for each one of these groups is very valuable to do. And so you do that by coming into the group header and we put break before, yes. So now we got to the end of the cabinets listed in room 1 and cabinet division forced a page break. And now we have a fresh page to start for room 2 listing the cabinet and the parts and the quantity. So this is a way that you can keep your reports a little bit tidier by enforcing page breaks. And as I really think about this, I think the only way that I know of to actually sort of like break this down further would be to actually use different tables where I'm calling like specifically for rooms, but I'm not entirely sure. I'll mess around with this a little and see if I can make it happen. This might just end up giving me repeated rows of information. Nope, it did what I kind of hoped for. So again, you can see at this point we've got our primary group header called room one, or it's for the where it's like our room name, and then below that we've got groups of the specific cabinet numbers. So under cabinet one, we've got all the parts listed. Under cabinet two, we've got all the parts listed until the end of the initial group. So now we've got a group change for room two, which forced a page break. So again, I know that this is very simple. It's a very simple report that we've produced here, but I think that the foundation for doing a lot with Cabinet Vision's report editor is here, especially if you familiarize yourself a little more with FlySpeed so that you can build your queries visually without having to understand precisely how to write all of this stuff. So I hope you guys have benefited from today's stream. And as always, thank you guys for participating and contributing. And we'll see you next time.